Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the world's most exciting classroom. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I'll be your host for today. Welcome back to our classrooms in the Australia, New Zealand region of the world. I know you were just on break for a little while, and then we were in South Africa with the crew of the Oosterschelde and the DARWIN200. So it's been a little while since we've connected for one of our world's most exciting classroom events. This will be our 16th world's most exciting classroom event. For classrooms in this part of the world. And then in our more regular series that we've been doing since the ship launched, we've done 80 of these world's most exciting classroom events. So really connecting classrooms all over the world with what we've been up to as we sail around the world following Darwin's voyage of the Beagle. It is kind of the home stretch. So the ship was just in Cape Town. I'm going to put the map up here so I can show you what we've been up to. So there we go. If you want to play with this map yourself, you can go to DARWIN200.com and you can track what we're up to in real time. And then you can even click on the picture image here and it'll bring up some recent photos from the journey and video clips. And then if you click the bird icon, it'll bring up some of the bird lists that we've been collecting as we've been sailing around the world doing our global bird survey. So if we zoom in a little bit here, you can see where we spent almost a month here in Cape Town. We took a little trip around to Simonstown where Darwin visited when he was there back in the 1830s. And then we unveiled a bust of Charles Darwin, which if you ever visit Simonstown, you'll be able to see that bust there in the harbor. It's a really cool bronze statue. We then went back to Cape Town, and then just about a week or so ago, we set sail for our next destination. So while the ship was in Cape Town, we had 10 Darwin leaders join us to work on different projects in the field, ranging from Cape vultures to sharks to African penguins. And then, yeah, we've been sailing for just over a week now. And you can see we're getting close to our next destination. Off the coast of Africa is the island of St. Helena. It is right up here, and you can see we're probably maybe in the next 24 hours, we will actually arrive, which will be pretty cool. We'll have a new group of Darwin leaders, and we'll have all kinds of activities from St. Helena as well. There's a couple little clips here I can show you. This is a really cool video shot from the ship sailing at night. So let me hit play here so we can check it out. I'm thinking maybe one of our camera guys, had the drone up in the air so you can see this really cool shot of the ship at night. Doesn't look like there's much wind. It looks like the sails kind of caved in a little bit, so it's probably pretty easy for the pilots, our camera operators, to use the drone to get these cool shots. And then let's see what else have we got here. We've got a few new images. There we go. So again, light winds, and we're hopefully going to meet our researcher soon. So we have a researcher on board. Her name is Mariana, and she is one of our Explorers Club researchers, and she's doing a really cool eDNA sampling. So we've talked about environmental DNA, and ever since Fiji, we've been sampling the water to see what DNA is left in the water, what creatures are leaving behind their DNA, so we can see what's living in the water. But what's cool about what Mariana is going to be doing from Cape Town all the way to the Azores, you can see a whole bunch of cord here, is she is doing deep water samples. So the samples we've been doing up to now have just been surface samples where we can put a bucket in and take a sample. But she is sinking a pump down to 200 meters and then pumping a huge volume of water and filtering out the eDNA. So what we're going to be able to see is what the marine life is like in these deeper portions of the Atlantic as we make our way all the way along the coast of Africa and then up along the coast of Europe. So that's pretty cool. It looks like we have one more video clip here that we can check out. Let me zoom in here and click on it. There we go. All right, what are we up to here? Looks like just a shot from the deck. We've got a few sails up there at the front. So it looks like a little bit of wind, making some good progress here. There's a few little clips from most recently. I'm going to come back from the screen share here because, like I said, we have been in Cape Town for about 3 weeks, and it's the first time that we've been connecting with this group of students here in this part of the world. So we have a little arrival video that you guys haven't seen yet. So after we sailed to Simonstown, we came back to Cape Town. We've got a really cool video of the ship returning back to Cape Town, and this will give you an idea of what it looks like in the Cape Town area. So let's get this playing. So there we go. We've got some common dolphins here. We had, I believe, Tom, one of our camera operators, was in a little boat, and he was waiting for the Oosterschelde to arrive to take some video clips. And while he was doing that, he got these great shots of this pod of dolphins. You can see some young little baby dolphins there as well. And then we've got this view of the iconic Table Mountain, and just in front of it, you can see Signal Hill. You can see part of Cape Town here, and that flat top mountain, Table Mountain. And then there we go. The Oosterschelde is making its way to the harbor, V&A waterfront. So Tom is there in a little boat going around the ship and capturing some of this really cool footage here for us. So there we go. A couple shots there. You can see a few of the sails have been taken down because as we get close to the harbor, we take the sails down because it's much easier to navigate the harbor with the other ships and to get to our berth with the sails down and using the motor. But there's a really cool shot from water level with Table Mountain there in the background and Cape Town. All right, very cool video clip. And the last little bit here, it was just a killer sunset. So, you know, Cape Town is really known for its sunsets, amazing sunrises and sunsets in Cape Town. But wait till you see the colors here in this little clip. I think you'll be pretty impressed with these sunsets, and you'll see why Cape Town has such a great reputation for just amazing sunsets. If you look carefully, you can see a few people kind of furling the masts, wrapping them up nice and tightly as the ship's making its way back into the harbor. And then you can see a few people climbing down after securing those masts. So just a really beautiful sunset, a really great arrival back in Cape Town. All right, let's talk a little bit about our plan for today. We're going to do two big things today. I spent just about 3 weeks in Cape Town. So the first week I went up to the Greater Kruger area, and I went chasing lions and leopards and wild dogs, among other wildlife. So I've got some great photos and videos, and I'm working on some educational videos as well. We'll start releasing soon. Then I spent about a week in the Hans Bay area, which is where two of our Darwin leaders were, with a group called Marine Dynamics. And we were working on projects with the African penguins and with the sharks and a few other cool things. And then I was in Cape Town for a little while as well. So what I want to share with you today is some pictures and video clips from my time in the Greater Kruger area. After that, we've got a brand new experiment to kick things off. We'll have our Curiosity of the Week at the very end. But we also have a clip from Hailey Shchepanik. So Hailey was our Explorers Club researcher when we sailed from Sydney, Australia to Hobart, Australia in Tasmania. And she was doing some eDNA, but also looking at debris in the water. So things like floating plastics and other debris that might have come off of ships. So we had a great conversation with Hailey a few days ago. So I've got that clip I'll share as well. But I want to get right into this South Africa action because I think you'll really enjoy these pictures, these video clips. Send any questions you want in the chat and I will answer them as well. But I am going to share my screen here and get some pictures up for you. And we're going to get right into this action. So here we go. All right. And maybe I'll move this to my other screen so I can move it around a little bit easier. There we go. Okay, there's my pictures. So the Greater Kruger area, there's Kruger National Park, but the Greater Kruger area is a series of private game reserves. And these private game reserves have little lodges on them, and they used to be fenced off and separate from the park. But years ago, the landowners decided to drop the fences between Kruger and the reserves. So it enlarged the size of the national park. It gave more space for the animals to move and migrate. And it's a great spot to visit. The one reserve that I visited is called Klasiri Private Game Reserve. It's 66,000 hectares. So it is a huge amount of space. and it is home to the Big Five. So if you don't know what the Big Five is, the Big Five got that name because they were the most dangerous animals to hunt in Africa. So if you were hunting these animals, these Big Five, there's a chance you could get hurt or even killed because they are big, dangerous animals. Now, of course, we don't hunt a lot of them anymore because they're endangered, and we really are concerned with conservation now. But they still have the name Big Five, and tourists like to go and shoot them in a different way using their cameras. So it's a goal for a lot of people when they visit Africa to take pictures of or see the Big Five in the wild. So let's see if I was lucky enough to see the Big Five. So here's our first member of the Big Five. This is the buffalo. They are really big. We spent a whole morning tracking this herd of buffalo before we found them. And for animals that are so big, they were pretty hard to find. And there was about 300 of them in this herd when we finally tracked them down. And I mean, you can see why they could be dangerous. They're big, they have a bit of a temper, and if you get in their way on the ground, they will charge right through you. So here's a couple pictures of those buffaloes. So our first member of the Big Five. Here's a couple more of those buffalo. Our next member of the Big Five is the elephant. So we came across quite a few herds of elephants. You can see that they love to cool themselves down with water. And so they use that trunk to suck up some water and spray it over their bodies, or sometimes they'll just lay right down in the mud or the water and roll around. And you can see here, we've got a great group here. So they are led by the oldest female, the matriarch, leads the herd. And there's all different generations of elephants. So as we look at a few more pictures, you can see this group at the watering hole, and you can see the different size elephants. There's at least 3 different sizes of elephants here. There's some young ones, some maybe adolescent ones who are growing, and then we've got more of our larger full-size elephants. And then this one here was crossing the Kasiri River, and look at how tiny this little one was. This one couldn't have been more than a few weeks old there, following along with its mother. And I said they like to lay down and roll in the mud. It helps them cool off. It helps them keep insects away when they get their body all covered in mud. So you can see this elephant is enjoying a little roll in the mud on the side of the river. So that was the second member of the Big Five. And our third is our rhino. These are southern right rhinos. And here's a couple pictures of a baby rhino. So let's look at the next one here. This is just a little round little tank, this baby rhino. Again, this couldn't have been more than a month or so old. And we'll give you a nice size comparison here with its mother. So there's the full-grown mother, and then we've got the little baby rhino there. And you can see that the mother rhino, the horns have been removed. And they do this in a lot of the reserves because it protects them from poachers. So poachers will hunt the rhinos, they'll kill them, they'll cut off their horns, and 1 kilogram of rhino horn is worth $60,000 on the black market in Asia and places like China. They believe that the horn has medicinal value, but in fact, there's been lots of research on this, and there is no medicinal value. The horn is made of something called keratin, which is the same thing our fingernails are made out of and our hair. So they do remove the horns. They grow back after 3 or 4 years, and they have to do it again. But it doesn't really bother the rhinos. It's no different than us trimming our fingernails or cutting our hair. It doesn't hurt the rhino in any way, and it protects them, because before, where they'd lose hundreds of rhinos a year in these different reserves, now it's more like 1 or 2 a year in these reserves due to poaching. So it's unfortunate that these big, beautiful animals, we don't see them with their horns sometimes, but it is a method of conservation to help protect them from poaching. We have 2 more members of the Big Five to talk about. The next is our leopard. So the leopard here, this is a male leopard, and we only saw this guy for just a second while he was walking through the bush. So it's a really quick, blurry picture. Luckily, though, a few other days we saw more leopards, like this beautiful female leopard, and she is up in a tree eating an impala. So Why do they bring their food up in the tree? Well, they're very, very strong because obviously their meal is heavy, but they don't want to have their food stolen by lions or hyenas. So after a leopard makes a kill, it will very quickly bring that kill up into a tree so that it is safe from other predators and it can eat the meal at the pace that it wants to. It doesn't have to worry about that meal being stolen. So here's a few more pictures of this beautiful leopard. You can see in this picture, she's finished eating. And what she'll do the whole time that she's eating is she'll be cleaning herself. So she doesn't want to smell like blood or have blood in her fur, because when she's hunting, that's really going to impact how she hunts. If animals can smell her, if they can smell the blood, they're going to know she's coming. So the whole time she's eating, she's very clean. She's cleaning and licking herself the whole time as well. You can see here, she's looking right into the camera and licking those lips. And once you've been up in a tree for a little while and you've finished eating, you have to come back down. So she's pretty graceful as she's leaping from branch to branch to make her way down the tree. And then she kind of has to do this sideways shuffle to get back down to the bottom and back down to the ground. We go out at night as well on the game drive. So you can see here, we found another female leopard. And you can see the one that we saw before had green eyes, and this one had these beautiful, almost blue eyes. So you can see her again looking into the camera as I took a few pictures of her at night. And there's one more shot of the leopard from before, just looking right into the camera lens, which I thought was pretty cool. So our final member of the Big Five, yes, I was pretty lucky. I got to see the whole Big Five in the wild and take pictures and videos of them, is our lion. So the lions live in groups called prides. They hunt together, they work together. And most of the lions we saw were pretty lazy. They were just enjoying some rest, some relaxation. When we found this pride of lions, the one day they were hardly moving because the night before they must have caught something, maybe a zebra. And their bellies were big and swollen because they'd eaten so much food. So they're just kind of relaxing in the bush, digesting, and then maybe in a couple days, they'll be ready to head back out and hunt. You can see a big male lion laying here. You can see part of his mane there, his dark colored mane. And those big yawns showing off those big teeth. And then sometimes you find the lions out at night as well. So this one here, she had been separated from her pride. So she was looking for the group and she was kind of doing little quiet contact sounds, making little sounds and listening to hear if her pride would call back. So she was on her own and looking for the rest of her pride at night. But there is a lot more animals out in the bush than just our Big Five. And believe it or not, this might look like a cat that some of you might have at home or in your neighborhood. But in fact, this is not a domestic pet cat. This is an African wild cat. So these cats are wild. They live in the wild. They're a wild species of cat. And so they're out there hunting too, just like the leopards and the lions. So this is an African wild cat. There are so many beautiful birds. When I was there in Africa, I counted at least 125 new bird species that I'd never seen before, like these little bee eaters. So you oftentimes see them in a pair. They use the same branches and they wait on those branches and they pop up in the air and they catch bees right out of the sky, which is pretty cool. And they come back to that same branch. I saw 4 new species of owl, which was awesome. This is an African barred owlet. And then this here is an African scops owl. We have an African eagle owl here. And then the last species is a Verou's eagle owl. So this one is kind of cool. It's a big owl. It has pink eyelids, which is kind of unique. And then it's a little hard to tell in this picture, but it's eating something. And it looks like it's furry, so it might be a little mammal that it's caught there. So it's having a meal up there in the tree. There's lots of species of kingfishers that hunt fish in the water. This is a pied kingfisher, and it hovers over the water like a helicopter. It sits up there and flaps its wing. and then it dives down when it sees something it wants to catch in the water. There's beautiful colored birds like this lilac-breasted roller. And then when they fly, it's even cooler. They've got these beautiful blue feathers that you can see when they take off. If you've ever watched Lion King, I'm sure you know Zazu, the hornbill. So these are yellow-billed hornbills, and they are everywhere. Anytime you're out in the bush, you usually come across these hornbills, usually in groups of 2, sometimes in more than 2, but always usually in a group of 2. These are hunters, these birds. These are magpie shrikes. And so they don't hunt like a hawk or an eagle, but they do catch things like insects, maybe small mice, lizards, and things like that. And what they do is kind of interesting. Shrikes, they tuck their food away in trees. Sometimes they spike them on branches, and they come back and they eat them later. So it's kind of an interesting thing that shrikes do. Of course, we have baboons, like this baboon having a nice little rest here. Pretty relaxed group of baboons that we found. There are little reptiles like this chameleon. So you don't always see them during the day. You don't see them very much during the day, but we spotted this one crossing a road. And then at night, it's a little bit easier to find them because they climb out onto the branches and they're looking for insects to eat. There's a couple shots of this chameleon out at night and on the hunt. And then this is a leopard tortoise. So this tortoise wasn't very big, maybe about the size of my hand. We saw a couple of them out on the road, on the gravel roads that run through the reserve. So it's fun to be able to get out and get really low and get this picture with one of my macro lenses, which is really good for taking pictures of small things like frogs and lizards and insects and things like that. I think many of you know about our friends, the giraffes here in Africa. So they're pretty cool to see. And if you watch the giraffes, the buffalo, the impala, the elephants, oftentimes you'll see these little birds on them called oxpeckers. So in this picture, you can see a couple birds on the face of the giraffe. There's a couple more in the tree. And they have a symbiotic relationship with a lot of the big mammals. So the big mammals are usually covered in parasites and ticks and fleas and things like that. And these birds will hop around on their bodies and they will eat all those little insects. So the mammals get cleaned off and the birds get a really easy source of food. But sometimes they get a little too close to the mouth or to the eyes and get shooken off by the giraffe or the buffalo. But then they come back and they keep doing what they do. Here are some impala. Impala, these are 2 males and they're play fighting. But in a few weeks from now, it'll get more serious because they'll be fighting for females. So right now they're just practicing, testing their skills. But pretty soon the fights will get a lot more serious because they will be battling for females. And then we call impalas fast food because there are tons of them in the bush. On their bum, they have a black M shape. So people say that they're McDonald's or they're fast food because there's lots of animals like the wild dogs and the leopards and the hyenas who will hunt these impala. So they're very fast, but they're an important prey item for a lot of the predators. Here's a smaller predator. This is a jackal. So jackals are a lot of the time are scavengers. So they'll hang around lions and hyenas and they'll try to sneak in and get some of the leftovers of the kills that the bigger animals make. So they're looking for those scraps as scavengers. And then here is our biggest antelope species in the bush. This is the kudu. So this is a female kudu. And then you can very easily tell the male because they have these big spiral shaped horns. So that was a female kudu. And then this is a male kudu. And they're the largest species of antelope in this part of Africa. And then we have some smaller monkeys, like these little vervet monkeys. A couple shots here of them playing around. And then our warthogs. So this is 2 baby warthogs. And then you can see the mother here. She's got her big tusks that she uses to dig things out of the ground, but she can also use them to defend herself and her young family. Here's just a closer picture of those big tusks. You would not want to get in between her and where she wants to go, because even though they're not really big, they're about the size of maybe a regular pig, but they could run right over and knock you down, and then those big tusks wouldn't feel too good either. But my favorite of all the animals I got to spend time with in the bush in Greater Kruger was the wild dogs. So the wild dogs are sometimes called painted wolves. There's only 4,000 of them left in Africa. And they are the best hunters in Africa. So to give you an example, lions are successful 40% of the time. So 40% of the time when they go hunting, they're going to catch something, but 60% of the time, they're not going to catch anything. Wild dogs, on the other hand, are successful hunting 90% of the time. They hunt in a pack, they work together really well, and they have really good stamina. So something like an impala might be faster than a wild dog, but the wild dog can run faster for longer. So eventually the impala is going to get tired, and the pack of wild dogs will catch what they're hunting. So here's a few pictures of those wild dogs. Sometimes you find them and they're just laying around. Other times you find them and they are on the move, on the hunt, and they're very hard to keep up with and to track, because we can't leave the gravel roads as easily, and they can kind of move wherever they want through the bush, and they can move pretty quickly when they want to. They're very social, so they're always making sounds, and they're always close to each other and connected. And then you can see a few pictures of them here in the bush. You can see how hard they are to find sometimes when they get right into the bush and they're just laying down. And then just a few more pictures. I have a video clip I'm going to share in a second of the wild dogs. But here's a picture of them on the move, on the hunt, making their way down the trail. And this is a picture of the whole group of them. So there's a dozen in this group, 12. And if you count carefully in this picture, you can find all 12 of them making their way down the path. We have our wildebeest, which are another big plains animal in Africa. And the last animals here are our zebra. So here's a few shots of those zebra. Here's a couple of them hanging out. All right, there we go. So there's a few pictures I want to share with you from my time in the bush. I got pretty lucky and got to see the big five. Got to see over 100 species of birds and all kinds of other really iconic African animals like those wild dogs. So if there are any questions, feel free to start putting some in the chat. But before we move to question mode, I want to share a couple of video clips with you as well. So I'm going to stop this screen share and I'm going to change over to a few videos to show you what it was like being out in the bush. So in this first clip, you can see we have our tracker, Vusi, on the front. He's looking for footprints and animals. We have Pierre. He's driving the vehicle. He is our guide. And then you can see we're looking around the side of this river. And then we decided, you know what? Let's go across the river. So we're going to drive across the river to start checking out what's going on the other side. These safari vehicles are big and tough. They can handle driving through the water. They can handle going over rocks, through the bush, going over small trees if they need to. They are big, tough vehicles. This is sunrise. We've got a beautiful sunrise as we're out for this game drive first thing in the morning. We just crossed this river. All right, in this next little clip, I'll show you what it's like when you're in the bush and you find something. So you never know what you're going to see as you go around each corner. Sometimes you see nothing for a while, or sometimes you come across a scene like this. So we've got some giraffes there in the trees. We've got a little group of zebras. And oftentimes you'll find the different animals together. Things like zebras, things like impala, things like giraffes. They're in a group because the more eyes and ears and noses, the more likely they are to realize that there are predators. So that's why you can often find them in these groups.
Funny how they stay as they walk past.
So we'd often park. I'd have my camera. The guide would talk a little bit about the animals, and we'd just spend some time with them. In this next clip, this will give you kind of an idea of what it's like at night. So we go out at night because there's a whole different group of animals that come out at night, and a lot of animals are more active. So you can see Vusi on the front. He's got his spotlight, he's looking, and then we just came to a little dirt runway. And on this runway, we found a whole group of impala here in the dark. And the reason that they're on the runway is because they can see better. So if they're out on the runway, they can see better if predators are coming. So they go to that open space at night to see what they want to see, and it gives them a better view to help them avoid predators. Here's one more clip at night. Why do we go out at night? Because we see things like this. This is a beautiful female leopard. She is on the hunt. Now, the animals are very used to people being around in the vehicles, and they don't really get worried because every encounter they've ever had with humans in their vehicles is generally just like this, the humans just watching. So they're very used to the vehicles being around. They're not afraid of people being there. There she is, beautiful leopard on the hunt, not too bothered that we're there. And this last little clip I want to share with you is the wild dogs on a hunt. So the wild dogs have already caught an impala. They're eating what's left of the impala here, but there's some hyenas who want to steal what's left of the impala. So there's two hyenas came and they're trying to steal the impala carcass. You can see that the wild dogs, they're not too concerned. There's more of them than the hyena. You can see the hyena stealing what's left. And then the wild dogs kind of are watching. They're kind of surrounding them.
They're waiting for them to take each other on. They've got it back.
And then as we kind of sat and watched, the wild dogs were kind of messing with the hyenas. They'd surround them. They'd sneak up on them and bite them from behind on the butt. And then eventually they were able to steal what was left of the impala back from those hyenas. But when you saw the wild dogs hunting, you would oftentimes find the hyenas following them because the hyenas, like the jackals, like to steal some of their meal sometimes as well, scavenge for them. Okay, so I see lots of questions in the chat, so let's answer a few of those questions before we take a look at our experiment for this week. How close can you get to the animals? Well, a lot of times the animal chooses how close we get. If we get too close, the animal will leave. But sometimes we could be sitting in the vehicle and the animals come right up to the vehicle. And so Vusi, who you saw sitting on the front, who's the tracker, sometimes the animals like a hyena or a leopard will walk right by and sniff his boot. So sometimes the animals come really, really close. And the nice thing about visiting the game reserves around Kruger is that there's different rules. So when you visit Kruger National Park, you have to stay on the roads and there's a lot more people. So sometimes you might come across a lion in the national park, but there's 30 other cars all surrounding that lion. So you feel almost like you're in a little zoo sometimes. But in the reserves, there's way less people and you can go off road a little bit to get a little bit closer to get some really good pictures. So how close are you allowed to get? Really as close as the animals are comfortable. And the animals will let you know if they're not comfortable because they'll just get up and they'll leave. But like I said, they're really used to people being around in the safari vehicles. And so oftentimes they don't even look up when you drive close to them or you drive by them. So very used to people. How many different animals were there? That's a really hard question to answer. There was a lot. Some animals, there's very few of, like the leopards. You only see them once in a while and they're always usually alone. Whereas then you might find the buffalo and there's 300 of them. Or you might find impala, and on one game drive that usually lasts about 3 hours, you might see hundreds and hundreds of them because they're all over the place. In total, I think there's 700 species of birds in that part of Africa, in all of South Africa. And yeah, like I said, I saw about 125 different species, which was pretty cool. How big were the wild dogs? Think about like a German Shepherd. If you've ever seen something like a German Shepherd, that's about how big the wild dogs are. And maybe they're just like a little bit thinner because they're, they need to be able to get through the bush, and they're running all the time. So they're kind of like maybe a little bit of a thinner, a little bit of a sleeker German Shepherd, I would say. How long are the beaks on the bee eaters, the birds that catch the bees? Not very long. I would say maybe 2 to 3 inches. So the beaks don't have to be very long. The birds just have to be fast, and they are very fast. And so they're able to catch those bees right out of the air. My favorite animal had to have been the wild dogs. I've always wanted to see wild dogs. Like I said, they're rare to see. There's only about 4,000 of them. So I got really lucky and was able to spend several days. I saw them on different days. We followed them. We watched them hunt. We watched them catch and eat things. We watched them relax. We watched them play. We watched them interact with other animals like hyenas. So yeah, pretty lucky to get to spend all that time with the wild dogs. Which animal was the scariest? I didn't really find the animals very scary. I was really just excited to be there and to see them. But what I will tell you is the trackers, like Vusi, they don't like snakes. And there's a snake called a black mamba. And they are very, very venomous snakes. If you get bit by a black mamba and you don't get anti-venom very, very quickly, there's a good chance, you're not going to make it. You're going to die because the venom is very strong. And sometimes when the vehicles are driving through the bush and black mamba gets scared, they rear up and put their heads up, and they can rise up almost as tall as the hood of the vehicle. So it really scares the trackers when that happens. So the trackers don't like snakes very much, and they really, really, really don't like the black mambas. All right, what do we got? We got a few more questions here. I've got a question about how old the zebras can be, and I honestly don't know that. Let's see if we can figure it out here. We'll do a quick check. About 20 years they usually live in the wild, but that would be if everything goes really well for them, because zebras are obviously hunted by things like lions, and maybe even leopards would hunt, particularly the baby zebras. So zebras, maybe 20, 25 years if all goes well in the wild. But yeah, they're definitely on the menu for a few animals out in the bush. Let's see, rhino horn. How long does it grow? I'm just trying to think to some pictures that I've seen of rhino horns. I think that they can grow to be over 2 feet long in some cases. In the game reserves, you would never see them that long because they remove them before they get that long and before they're a temptation for poachers. But I have seen pictures of rhinos with really long horns, and there can be like over 2 feet long, so they can get pretty long. My favorite bird that I saw, I really like owls. So seeing 4 different new species of owls in the bush was pretty cool. But my favorite out of the 4 of them, I think, was those African barred owlets, because they lived right at one of the lodges where I was staying. So I got to see them every day. And sometimes you would see 2 or 3 of them sitting in the tree. So you'd be having your breakfast and they'd be sitting just on a branch in the tree above you. So it's pretty cool to get to see them a few times. How long do wild dogs grow? I would say 1.5 meters. If you measured them from their nose to the tip of their tail. And if you noticed, all of their tails had that white fur on the end. And that's to help when they're in the bush and they're hunting, because if they look around, they can see those white tails sticking up, and it's almost a way for them to kind of say, okay, you're there, you're there. I'm going to go here. And so it kind of helps them stay in contact while they're running through the bushes. What are differences between the domesticated and wild dogs? Well, domesticated dogs, related to the gray wolves, and we have changed them over time. So think about what a gray wolf looks like in the wild, and then think of all the different kinds of dogs we have. And the reason we have all those different kind of breeds of dogs is because we've selectively bred them over time. So if we had a dog with a trait, let's say flatter ears or longer tails or more red in their fur, well, if we kept breeding dogs, selected those dogs with more red in their fur, over time, the pups that were born would be redder and redder. Same thing with the size of the dogs. If we wanted smaller dogs, well, we would keep breeding smaller and smaller dogs each time, and then take the smallest puppies when they grow older and breed them. And so over time, we've changed from those ancestors, the gray wolves, and now we have all those different varieties of dog types, those breeds that we have. Now, the wild dogs, nobody has pet wild dogs. They're wild, they hunt. You wouldn't want to try to pet one of them, but when you watch them, they very much remind you of like a dog that you might see in your neighborhood. They play, they fight, they sleep a large part of the day, but the big difference is they are very, very fierce hunters, very, very good hunters. And whereas, the dogs in your neighborhood are friendlier, and we've bred those dogs over time to be friendlier and be more comfortable with humans, the wild dogs don't want anything to do with people. They don't mind if you're kind of following them in a vehicle. It doesn't really bother them that much. But I think if you got out of the vehicle, they'd run away pretty quickly. They wouldn't want you hanging around. Okay. Very cool. So great questions. Thank you for those great questions. Next week when we connect, we'll have more to share, and I'll share some of the ocean time. When I was out in Hans Bay, I know some classes might have already watched some of the recordings of the live events. We did a live shark cage dive with bronze whalers, which was really cool. We went out on Dyer Island with the African penguins. We went on an Easter egg hunt, but we were looking for shark eggs instead of Easter eggs on the beach, which was pretty cool. And we'll talk more about that ocean time, and I've got lots of pictures and video clips that I can share next week. Let's take a look at our brand new experiment. So this is a short video. It's only about 3 minutes. It's a little bit different than any of the experiments we've done with you guys before. Take a look at it, and then we'll talk about it.
Welcome back, everyone. In today's experiment, we're going to explore the immense distances of the solar system and just how enormous our universe is. In movies and books, you often see all the planets of the solar system close together, almost bouncing into one another. But in reality, it's not like that. In today's experiment, you can find out just how far the planets are from one another and from the sun. To start this experiment, you need to inflate a balloon to about 20 centimeters in diameter. That will represent the sun. Next, you need a little object to represent each of the planets in the solar system. Mercury, the first planet from the sun, would be roughly the size of this little pinhead relative to the scale of this balloon representing the sun. Venus and Earth would both be about the size of a peppercorn or a small pea. I've got these two here to represent these two planets. So there's Venus and then Earth. Mars, the next planet from the sun, would be roughly the size of this little pinhead. And because Mars is the red planet, I've chosen a red pin. Jupiter, the gas giant of the solar system, would be about the size of a large walnut. As you can see, it's much bigger than all of the other planets. Saturn, the next planet, would be about the size of a hazelnut. Uranus and Neptune would both be about the size of a peanut, or these peanut-sized pebbles that I've chosen here to represent these planets in my model. Then, last but not least, Pluto. Nowadays, Pluto isn't regarded as a true planet, but rather a dwarf planet. But I'm going to include it anyway. At this scale, Pluto would actually be the size of a 2mm grain of sand, but that's so tiny you probably wouldn't even be able to see it on the camera. So I've picked this small little piece of plasticine that's probably 4mm across. Nevertheless, you can see Pluto is much smaller than all of the other planets. Now take your solar system out to your school's playground or football field, or into a local park. Place the Sun at one end, then position each of the planets at the distances you think they would be relative to the Sun. Start with Mercury, and then work your way out through the entire solar system. How far do you think each planet would be from the Sun at this scale? When you position your planets, put down a marker flag or an object that you can clearly see from a distance. Use a measuring tape to measure out the distances of each planet from the Sun and write down those distances so you can review them later. Consider really carefully the distances that you think each planet will be relative to the Sun. Join me in 2 weeks' time to find out the real distances between the planets at this scale. Good luck in your solar system experiment. Thank you for taking part, and see you next time.
Okay, there we go. So that is our experiment, is the looking at our solar system. So getting outside and giving your best shot at where you think those planets would be relative to the Sun. So you might want to do a little research online. You might just want to take some guesses with what you know about the planets and where they are. But what we really need from you is maybe some little video clips, maybe some pictures of your group outside and trying to set up a little solar system in your schoolyard and making your best guesses at where the planets should be, how far they should be from the Sun. So you might choose to do a little bit of online research. You might take your best guesses to make your solar system. We will, of course, pick a classroom or two for a gift card who send us in some pictures and video clips. And then next week, 2 weeks from now, we will reveal Stu out in the field and measuring and putting the planets where they belong. I think you're going to be really, really surprised by the results. So I will stick that banner up there just to remind you, classroom at DARWIN200.com is where we want you to send some pictures, to send some video clips. Send them there. And we would love to see what your classrooms come up with and how big you think the solar system would be compared to your classroom. Now, of course, it's way, 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 way bigger. But because everything shrunk down to a smaller scale, you can contain your solar system in your schoolyard. So I'm really curious to see what classes come up with and how you arrange your small scale version of the solar system in your schoolyard. So we don't have a lot of time left. We've only got about 10 minutes. So I'm only going to play a little part of Hailey's video, and then we'll play our curiosity right at the very end. So Hailey Shchepanik, like I mentioned, she joined us as a Darwin leader from Sydney, Australia to Hobart, Australia, so Tasmania. And she did some eDNA experiments. So I'm going to put her video on, but I'm going to pick the last 10 minutes because it highlights more of what her experience was like sailing on the ship. And I think that's maybe the most interesting part. So I'm going to load this video, and then I'm going to fast forward just on board the. I'm going to go to about here. And then let's check out Hailey's experience on the ship.
Throw the bucket overboard on a rope, catch some water, and then move on to my next stage. And it's really important that we sanitize this bucket between each collection so that we're not contaminating the water and we're not contaminating our sample. So then I would pull the bucket up, often with the help of other shipmates on the boat and pull it up and start filtering it. If you look in the very middle, you can see me holding a syringe and wearing my gloves.
So just to put into context for you where we started, she's talking about how she sampled for the environmental eDNA. So she'd drop a bucket into the water. She would take that sample from her bucket, and then she'd preserve the sample. So that's what she's talking about right now. Let's get back into it.
And this was because I was pushing all the water through a tiny filter like this. So I'm pushing the water through the filter, and in here is what's collecting all the DNA. So this is all I need to take back to the lab to start my analysis. I put about a liter or two of water, and this gives us a really good snapshot of all the animals that were present in that water sample that I took. And on the right, you can see a picture of me in the lab. This is when we crack open this filter, we cut it up into little bitty pieces, and we start adding different chemicals to take out the DNA and then to understand what animals were present in the sample. So that work is still ongoing because I was just on the ship in November, and sometimes these things take a couple months to do. We need to process it in the lab, and then we need to process it on our computer, where we take the information we get in the lab, and we have to do a bit of like a matching game, like a puzzle, where we take the DNA strands that we detected and match them to DNA strands of known animals. And here's just like a quick little video from the ship. You can see me screwing on that filter I just held up onto the syringe and pressing the water through the filter. This was one of the relatively calm days. It definitely wasn't this easy every single day. Sometimes with the water splashing all over. You can see I'm wearing my rubber boots and my rain pants. But we were lucky this day with really good weather, and I was able to get all my samples. I did this 3 times a day in order to get like an evenly spaced sampling, again, to try and understand invasive species. However, I mentioned, of course, the role of marine debris in this as well. So every hour I would go out and we'd scan for marine debris. Everyone on the ship was helping me look out with binoculars or look out with their eyes. However, we weren't encountering a lot of marine debris, which was really great. So instead of sampling marine debris while we were doing our sailing, I did some surveys while we were at ports, because this is an area where marine debris tends to accumulate and they settle and things tend to grow. So while we were in Sydney and while we were in Hobart, I did a survey for marine debris as well, taking photos of any organisms that we found. So environmental DNA, like I said, can be really good for studying invasive species, but it can also be good for other things like taking a large snapshot of everything that is found in our oceans, studying animals that hide, just kind of like I said, animals that we don't really see with our eyes, and also studying invasive or endangered species like sea turtles, for example, because instead of having to actually go to the animal and sample them and interact with them, we can just take a water sample and we'll get a lot of information without having to disturb the animals in their natural behavior. So the results from the study, like I said, are still ongoing, and I will be really excited to share it with the DARWIN200 team when they're done. But there are already so many scientists working together around our oceans, and that's why the DARWIN200 was a really excellent opportunity to be able to take samples all over the globe from environmental DNA and help out a lot of different scientists asking a lot of different questions. And we'll put this data in global databases, and this will help scientists in the future as well. So life on board the ship, it wasn't all sampling and filtering. I had a lot of different roles when I was there, and that's one of the best parts about it. So like I said, this was my first time to Australia, but it was also my first time on a sailing vessel. So each of us took turns as crew, which meant we sometimes had to be up in the middle of the night because someone had to be watching at all times and someone had to be steering the boat at all times. So you can see a picture of me steering. In the middle, you can see a picture of one of our other shipmates giving a presentation. This is really cool because I was there to do research and educate others, but also was able to listen to presentations by others as well. And this is someone who actually is an expert in historical maps. So he was able to tell us all about the history of exploration in the regions that we were sailing, which I thought was really cool. He brought us maps from the earliest explorers, and I thought it really, really was an amazing experience on the DARWIN200. And of course, 3 times a day, I would also do my sampling. And a few more videos from our time. You can see us, everything was a team effort. There's no way to do this alone. You can see us pulling and pulling and pulling on the sails. We also had some friendly visitors in the sun as we got into Hobart. You can see, wait for it. Jump. Little dolphins were such a welcome guest. It felt like a welcome party as we were coming back into port. And the sun came out, and we saw land after 7 days, and taking in the view while I take the last of my samples. So in a nutshell, the research on board that I did is still a work in progress, and it's part of larger projects that I do with different university collaborators all over the world. And like true explorers, we were given a couple of flags to hold during our expedition. And many of these flags have been all over the world, and in some cases, they've even been to the moon. You can see on the left is the WINGS flag, and this is an organization that funds women in expedition science. So they were able to give me a small grant to help do my work on this project. And on the right, you can see this was my team. So this is the shift that I work on, the people that I worked on with the different shifts, morning, evening, and night. And we're holding the Canadian chapter flag of the Explorers Club, which I got to take on the expedition with me and has also been on many expeditions before. And then finally, here's a picture of me back on land, and I was really happy because we were able to get all the samples that I wanted to understand how trash carries species, including invasive species, all over the world. And just one of the kind of takeaways that I wanted to leave with you today is think about your own self as you're, maybe you're traveling, you're walking on a beach at your national park. When we think about invasive species, we want to try not to bring things from one place to another. So one thing that I do when I'm exploring our natural places like parks and different trails is I try to take photos of shells and rocks and plants and anything I find that is interesting, and I'll keep them in an album instead of taking them home with me to collect and potentially transport invasive species in our world. So that in a nutshell is what I did for the DARWIN200. As Joe mentioned, I'm a diving safety officer in my daily life when I'm not on expedition. And this means I get to go to some really interesting places. This is actually a couple pictures from my time with the National Park Service in the US, where I worked as a scientific diver. And we do all sorts of different jobs underwater, from counting corals to surveying shipwrecks or vacuuming bugs off rocks to try and understand what our environment looks like. I also said I worked as an expedition scuba diver, and this is in conjunction with my work as a naturalist. So sometimes I get to go out into the world and lead people on hikes, telling them all about the biodiversity and the history of an area. And lastly, my role as a diving safety officer. You might be saying, what's that? And it's a term that I didn't know until a couple years ago. And it basically means the person that gets to be the expert in scientific diving at an organization. You get to train all of the scientific divers and different scientists and really help them gain the skills that they need to explore our oceans. It's a job that I absolutely love, and I'm really happy that over time I was able to get scuba diving experience and end up in this role. So if you're ever curious about our oceans, I started out as a lifeguard, someone who took a lot of swimming lessons, eventually got into snorkeling, and then scuba diving. And then now it's led me here to this really wonderful role. So thank you so much for listening today.
Okay, so there we go. That's a little taste of Hailey's time on board the Oosterschelde, and kind of the big takeaways she was looking for, using eDNA, looking for invasive species, and then talking a little bit about her jobs, where she works as a research scientist doing diving, but she's also a dive safety officer at the Vancouver Aquarium, which is pretty cool. So the last thing we have to do today is our brand new curiosity of the week. Let me bring it up. Let's take a look.
Welcome back, everyone. For this week's curiosity, I have these 4 strange objects here. What do you think these are? If you look closely, each one is a different shape and a different colour and has a slightly different pattern on it. They're very irregular. but they're slightly see-through and they're very hard. Definitely a mineral. Can you work out what these are? Send in your best guess to classroom@darwin200.com for a chance to win an Amazon gift voucher prize. Good luck and thank you for taking part.
Okay, there we go. You've got a pretty good clue there that it is some kind of a mineral. So that is your curiosity of the week. Experiment, solar system, 2 weeks to give it a try. Send us in some pictures to classroom@darwin200.com. For our curiosity of the week, you have 1 week to think about it, take some guesses, and send in your answers to classroom@darwin200.com. And there we go. That is the end of our 16th World's Most Exciting Classroom event. I hope you enjoyed our little virtual field trip to Kruger, the Greater Kruger area, and then getting to hear a little bit about one of our researchers, Hailey, who was on board when we were in Australia. Last thing we have to do is a shout out to our sponsors, our partners, our supporters, without whom we wouldn't be sailing around the world, having researchers on board, flying young Darwin leaders to ports to gain new conservation skills. And of course, we wouldn't be doing the world's most exciting classroom event. So hope to see you all again next week for our next event. But for now, we'll sign off with that shout out to our supporters. So thanks, everyone. Have a great week.